Welcome to Let's Talk About the Deep Stuff. I'm your host, Sean Kneese, and on this show, I have off the cuff and candid conversations about the big topics in the world. And a recent big topic in the news has been everything going on in Israel and Palestine. As many of you are aware, and today's guest offers a unique perspective on this issue. His name is Sam Stein. He is an activist in Israel with dual citizenship. He's originally from Long Island, and he's lived with Palestinians on the West Bank as they've endured attacks from radical settlers. And he's been an advocate for peace and equal rights in Israel for Palestinians. He's written articles for the New York Times on this topic, and more recently, he wrote for the Progressive Voice on crackdown on civil liberties in Israel since October 7th. And he's here today to share his experiences and thoughts on everything going on. So thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
So to start off, what can you tell us about how you first became involved in what's going on with Israel and Palestine and how your views on it developed?
Yeah, definitely. I grew up in a Orthodox, religious, very right-wing and very Zionist family, as you mentioned, in Long Island. And always kind of questioned certain aspects of the politics I was raised on, but didn't really question others. There was always kind of like a very blatant racism and homophobia that I could see and feel, and like I knew it was wrong. And for some reason, that just never really extended to the narrative I was raised on around Zionism. I do remember actually the kind of first subversive thought I had was when I was in sixth grade, so I was about 12 years old. It was during Israel's unilateral disengagement from the Gaza Strip. And I don't even remember, I wasn't very aware of what was going on and like the details of anything at all. But I just kind of really vividly remember that my rabbis in school were really, really talking about Israel at this time in my life, for obvious reasons. And I remember one of my rabbis just saying like all this racist stuff, just like, they're taught to kill us. They all hate us. They only want this land because we have it. And all this other crazy stuff. And I just remember kind of thinking, oh, there must be a school room of a bunch of, 12-year-old Palestinian kids, thousands of miles away, being told the exact same thing about us.
That's interesting. You could pick that up that young, like that kind of, because like usually when people are young, like that kind of stuff, like they're more impressionable. Like,
yeah, definitely. It's something that, it's funny because obviously for years after that, I didn't really like act on that thought. It's not like, I would love to say that in sixth grade, I really started unraveling all of the propaganda I was raised on. But I did have that kind of one subversive thought. And I do think in a lot of ways it stuck with me. And then after high school, I did a gap year studying Torah in the community that I grew up in. It's pretty much standard that, after high school, you spend a gap year studying Torah in Israel, and then you go to college. We don't even call it a gap year. It's just your year in Israel. It's high school, Israel, college. And my gap year was actually in this program called Mechinat Yayud that was located in an illegal settlement in the West Bank, a settlement called Migdal Oz. And I didn't know what that meant at the time. I had literally zero idea. The first time I ever heard the phrase "the green line,"
which is like the border.
The green line is the kind of accepted border between Israel and the West Bank. The West Bank being kind of the main entity that would become a Palestinian state. And the Israeli settlements within the West Bank are all considered illegal under international law. And the first time I ever had heard the phrase "the green line" was after I got accepted to this program. I told somebody where I was going to be, and I don't remember who it was. I just remember she said, "Oh, wow, pass the green line. You're such a good Zionist." And it was like a good thing. It was like obviously a good thing. And I was just kind of like, okay, I guess there's this line, and it's green, and I'm past it, and that's a good thing. And I went on my year. Mechina is an army prep program. It literally means preparation in Hebrew. And in line with that, there are Israeli mechinas that kind of prepare you for the army. Some are like a little different, whatever. Some are more right wing, some are more liberal or moderate. I don't want to say left wing because that's like an oxymoron. And mine was this American program kind of modeled off of those. And there absolutely was this idea that, um, we were all international. Nobody had Israeli citizenship, but there was this idea that, like, ideally, the absolute kind of success story for anyone on this program is that they, through the Israeli law of return, get Israeli citizenship and enlist in the IDF. And in line of that, kind of what the program was we would learn Torah in the mornings, and then in the afternoon we would either volunteer or go on hikes and jog a lot. And we had like a Krav Maga class once or twice, like every other week or whatever it was. And I remember, there's just kind of like the kind of undertone to all of this is that I had a really good year and positive experience for all of this. And I think that really, really ironically to this day kind of formed my relationship with this place. But it's also kind of where I was exposed to all of these things that I just couldn't get out of my head. Like I remember, in my Krav Maga class, we had like shooting classes, and the targets were literally, racist caricatures of Palestinians with their faces covered holding knives. We had this exercise where we basically kind of like role played a night raid of a Palestinian home. You're going to go catch a terrorist and you like break into his house at night. And even not in the confines of the program, but just living in this area, living in an illegal settlement, walking around and driving around and seeing things, seeing that Palestinians had different license plates, seeing that the checkpoint in between the West Bank and Israel only checks you in one direction. You only get checked going from the West Bank into Israel. The reason for that is that anyone can go in because Israelis have full access to the entire region of Israel-Palestine, everything between the river and the sea, with, I guess, the exception of Gaza, and on paper, Area A of the West Bank, which we'll maybe get into more, but not important for now, and that's not enforced anyway. But Palestinians, on the other hand, specifically West Bank Palestinians, Palestinians of residents of the West Bank who are kind of like under the supposed authority of the Palestinian Authority, need permits for anything to get into Israel, for everything really, but specifically to get into Israel. So that's the only direction that it matters to check anyone, because that's the only direction that anybody could be doing something that they're like quote unquote not allowed to be doing. And I didn't know that, but something just like felt weird about it. I was like, oh, this isn't a border, but it only checks in one direction, and like we kind of treat it as a joke. We just like drive through it. It doesn't matter. It doesn't affect our lives in any way whatsoever. And that kind of like all that stuff, I wouldn't say laid the seeds, because again, unfortunately, I can't pretend that I really began to unpack this stuff there either. But again, kind of was there, stuck in my brain, something that I couldn't really shake. And then I got to college, and that's when this process did really start. Was one of my best friends, who grew up in the same community as me, also spent a gap year, actually spent 2 years learning in a yeshiva in the old city of Jerusalem, is still Orthodox. We're still incredibly close. And he kind of, when we were in college, he just started talking about the occupation a lot. He can give his own entire interview about his unlearning process, but I just kind of got the end result, which was my best friend talking about the occupation a lot and how horribly Palestinians are treated. And I'd always been taught that kind of any mention of the occupation is an anti-Semitic conspiracy theory. So to hear my best friend, who is Orthodox and like way more religious than me and more knowledgeable of Judaism and Torah than me, be talking about this was kind of like, huh, I don't think he's an anti-Semite. So now we need to unpack this.
And that's rare for an Orthodox too, right? Because usually they're the ones that are like the most Zionist, the Orthodox.
Yeah, I would say that kind of like a certain central sphere of the Orthodox world is kind of the peak of Zionism in the Jewish world, because the Haredi community, what some people call ultra-Orthodox, are largely speaking less Zionist to not Zionist at all to anti-Zionist, but that's kind of a whole other thing to unpack. My community, really, the more like modern Orthodox community, is definitely, the peak of Zionism in the Jewish world in a lot of ways. Um, and yeah, this friend kind of got the ball rolling for me, kind of just like made it this thing that I needed to actually learn about. I was kind of like, that was when I was like, okay, I need to figure out what I think about this. Like, I don't, maybe I'll come out of this and like none of my views will be changed, but I need to like actually address this. And then my last semester in college, when I'd already definitely kind of become more left wing on this issue, this Palestinian guy, my age, a college student from Bethlehem, came and spoke to the Hillel Club, the Jewish Culture Club at my college in New York. And I remember it really, really resonated with me that Bethlehem and Migdalos and Efrat, the settlement that I lived, are right next to each other. Actually, like the wall is in the way. And I remember very, very naively thinking, "Oh, we were neighbors," which is just like technically true and completely naive and borderline oxymoronic to be neighbors.
Like he couldn't go back to his home, right? Like he didn't have right of.
Yeah, like I have rights and he doesn't. We're not neighbors. We live next to each other, but we're not neighbors. And he mentioned completely in passing just needing to get a permit to go to Jordan to use their airport because he's not allowed. Palestinians in the West Bank are not allowed to use Ben Gurion Airport in Tel Aviv. They need to get a permit to enter Jordan and fly out of Amman. And he mentioned that completely in passing, and I just remember thinking, like, what? Like, I just, I was American. I didn't have Israeli citizenship yet. I just like hopped on a plane, landed in Ben Gurion, drove into the West Bank, and like started walking around like I owned the place. And I remember thinking, "Oh, that's apartheid." Yeah. And that was really kind of the point of no return. Like I could just never, I could never look at things here the same ever again after that. But at the same time, I wanted to move here kind of since I was 18 and since I had that really positive year, that bizarrely positive year, honestly, on my gap year, I wanted to move here. And the more and more I learned, that just like never went away. I kind of kept expecting it to and just didn't. And I kind of decided that I was gonna go through with that, but it came with responsibility. I was choosing to move here after everything I learned and like kind of opt in to civil life here, and like I need to be doing the work. I need to be on the ground fighting for equality, and that was 4.5 years ago, and that's kind of just been it ever since. Just spending a lot of time with Palestinian communities in the West Bank, engaging in what we call protective presence activism, which is basically being human shields in a way. Just there are actual legal and social consequences for radical violent settlers in the West Bank who freely, with zero consequences, attack Palestinians all the time, particularly Palestinian shepherds in more rural areas of what's called, under the Oslo Accords, it's called Area C, and it's the part of the West Bank that is demarcated as being under full Israeli civil and military control. So the Israeli army and the Israeli police force is who controls things there in every single way. And these settlers who have the very explicit goal of wanting to drive Palestinians out of Area C and of the West Bank and out of Israel-Palestine in general, the absolute like dream for them is that Palestinian life is so unlivable that they get up and go at least to like the big cities that are technically under the authority of the PA, but even better yet, to Jordan, to Europe, wherever. And they constantly subject Palestinians to these horrific violence, whether it's throwing stones at them or beating them with poles or, massive property damage, cutting down olive trees, burning down homes. and there are no consequences. Yesh Din is a Israeli legal human rights organization that documents this, that 90 something percent or whatever it is of, reported cases of violence against Palestinians go without any conviction. And the insane reality is that there are consequences for attacking people like me, a white-skinned Ashkenazi Jew
Hmm.
who has Israeli and American citizenship. If you're anything other than Palestinian, you have some level of kind of protection, and I'm at the peak of it. I have as much privilege as possible under this apartheid regime.
And that's kind of a hole
And
in the idea that it's all about security and about safety and not about racism. Because if it were about security and safety, like these settlers are violent and they're pretty much terrorists too. But like, there's no checking them or like at checkpoints at the same level they check a Palestinian. So that kind of puts a hole in that whole argument too.
yeah, absolutely. And like even further than that, if it were really about security, then they wouldn't let them be there. It's not,
Yeah.
besides for being a human rights, besides for being against international law and an act of expansionism, having your civilians in occupied land is a massive, massive security risk, and it requires you to dedicate massive human power and place very high amounts of soldiers and make a ton of investment to keeping that area secure that could be used protecting your own borders. Is actually exactly what happened on October 7th, by the way. You know, the communities in the south of Israel near the border with Gaza were vocally complaining that the soldiers, that Israeli soldiers, were taken from that border because the far right Minister of Finances, Bezalel Smotrich, and a lot of the other far right cabinet members of this Israeli government relocated those soldiers to protect settlements deep in the West Bank. So they actually, highlighted in an immediate horrible way that the occupation of the West Bank is a massive security risk in and of itself. So to talk about security is oxymoronic.
And they have
Um,
connections to like Israeli terrorists too, right? Like, because I know Ben Gavir. I saw this piece. It was like Ben Gavir and Shmodrin was another. Like, they actually were connected to people like who would bomb, like kill, like they would do acts of terrorism against like Palestinian Israel. And it's like I know like a lot of them influenced by the Kahanists too, that believed in like enslaving all non-Jews, and they were like the most extreme. But I know even the Netanyahu government like made deals with the Kahanists too.
yeah, absolutely. I mean, everyone, Itamar Ben Gavir is a proud follower of Mayor Kahana. He's kind of learned how to tiptoe around that to enjoy this false sense of legitimacy. But he was deemed too radical to be in the IDF when he was 18. He was not drafted. He's been in jail for incitement of violence before and spent his entire career as a lawyer getting settlers off for violence against Palestinians.
Well,
And this is something, like I said, was deemed too radical to be in an occupying army,
yeah.
and now he's in the government, and now he's has a cabinet position in the most far right government in the history of this country.
And what were like as you were like living with Palestinians in the West Bank, like what were some of the things you witnessed firsthand, like as far as like settler attacks, and also like what did you learn like as you spent more time with them, like what stereotypes I guess were challenged or preconceptions were challenged.
Yeah. So kind of like completing my thought from before, explaining protective presence activism, what really is just that me being there makes this settler violence less likely because there are consequences for attacking me. And if anything does happen, then me and, other activists, it's not just me, are documenting everything that happens, providing the footage both for legal purposes and for different NGOs that keep track of this sort of thing and for awareness raising. Something that really, really, almost basically every Palestinian that I've spoken to, something that like is such a common thread between them is that all of them say, share our story, like make sure that people in America and Europe know what's happening to us. And you see that with how much social media has completely changed Palestinian resistance and really been a massive, massive backbone of this struggle. But I would say in terms of living in these communities, something that I would say that most of my kind of stereotypes were already unlearned, honestly, like kind of highlighting my weird positionality in my upbringing
Yeah.
where I was able to be critical of some things but not other things. I whenever my rabbi said like horrible things about Palestinian people, it was always obvious to me that like that's racist. I just never questioned that the regime was doing bad things. Um, and then being in these impoverished villages, you know, that don't have electricity, don't have running water, kind of just you're confronted with it so quickly. You're just like, this is like, I remember the first week I was falling apart. You know, I went down, I spent 3 months living in like one specific community. And after on Thursday, I remember being like, should I stay for the weekend? Should I go back to Jerusalem and like recover and, you know, take a break, whatever. And like one of the other activists, like another American Israeli Jew, was just like, you need a break. Like you're falling apart. And like I can just tap out of that. Like I could just go back to my apartment in Jerusalem and take a 4-hour hot shower. And these people cannot, as I mentioned, you know, they need a permit just to get into Jerusalem. That's incredibly difficult to get. Their homes are these communities that like any American would be, you know, shocked at, just like so below their basic standard of comfort. And the first week I was down kind of ended up, we like half jokingly said it was kind of just a crash course in living under occupation. We went down Saturday night and Sunday, I think it was like, you know, Sunday soldiers entered the village. And then like Monday, settler kids stole a Palestinian's phone and we had to like argue with the police to try and get them to go into the settlement and get it back. And obviously they didn't. And then Wednesday, there were a ton of demolitions throughout the entire region, and we're just like driving and running after bulldozers for the entire morning, documenting these different demolitions. And then Thursday, kind of like the finale, you know, the grand finale of this 1 week. This is, again, like this is 5 days in the West Bank where like, you know, you're there, you're living it, but it's I can't change my skin, I can't change my race. No matter what I do, it's never as bad for me. And this is just 5 days of insanity that kind of culminated to Thursday afternoon. These settlers that were originally harassing this Palestinian woman grazing her sheep with like their faces covered. And then we go up to document and like 3 or 4 of them start walking towards us and King David style, like slingshots, like slinging rocks, just start hurling rocks at us. And we're trying to videotape and also trying to stay safe. And a soldier is right there for all of this. And she like maybe she like yells at them to stop and that's it. And then we have
like children that are Palestinian that just like threw a stone, and it was like an occupying force they threw a stone at, and then they're in prison even as little kids.
yeah, absolutely. And you know, if not worse. And then we have to go to the police station to report this, and we were just like sitting outside like an idiot for 2 hours, and like nothing gets done. It takes forever. And you're just like, I would rather the rocks, and you just like so confronted with why Palestinians a lot of the time decide to just not report the things that happen to them because there's no point. And that really like kind of, that week was crazy because it happened all at once. But every single thing that happened that week is a normal thing that can happen any day. That's just part of life as a Palestinian in the West Bank. And that really taught me, and the rest of my time in these communities really taught me that like it's every day. Like something happens every single day. Maybe I didn't see it. Maybe I wasn't there. Maybe I didn't document it. Somebody was arrested. Somebody was attacked by settlers. Like somebody got a demolition notice on their home. something horrible happens every single day. And, you every single day don't have electricity, don't have water, cannot build because it's impossible for Palestinians to get building permits to build homes. It's yeah, it's horrible.
Yeah, and what you said about like how you could just kind of go away from it, that made me think like even with like when I look at everything going on in Gaza, like the horrible stuff, I'm like, all right, I just need a break from this. But then I think like the people there, they have no way of getting a break from this. It's like 24/7.
Sorry, could you repeat that?
Oh, it kind of what you said about how you could just kind of leave the violence in the West Bank. It makes me think of like when I was looking at everything going on in Gaza, all the horrible stuff. I was like, I kind of need a break from this. But then I was thinking the people there that they don't have the luxury. Like that's a privilege, like to just be able to look away and because
Yeah,
like it's
absolutely.
24/7. Yeah,
And like it's been the blockade has lasted for longer than half of the residents of Gazans have been alive. You compare it to kind of Ukraine, that um, all these people in Ukraine had to flee their homes, which is horrific.
yeah,
And nobody should have to go through that, but they were able to. Like now, you
yeah.
have people in Gaza just slowly being shoved towards the southern border with Egypt, who's not going to let them in. Israel won't let them out. They're just completely stuck.
And there was even that document that said like there was a plan to kind of relocate everybody to the Sinai desert, and I think they just used October 7th as an excuse to do that, pretty much. So
Yeah, absolutely. It's absolutely all kind of an excuse and premise and facade, um, and that's becoming more and more obvious every single day.
yeah, and it's all and also the dehumanizing propaganda is kind of hypocritical, like you said, and like you said, like a lot of them weren't even born when Hamas was elected, and they say, oh, they voted in Hamas. So like by that logic, the people in Gaza or the people like they could say, well, the people on October 7th they voted for Netanyahu, who supported these settlement programs. Like they can make the argument the other way. So it's like it's just not you can't have like a double standard about it. It's like
Absolutely. And all those kind of talking points that are brought up against Palestinians, like they turned down peace or they voted in
yeah.
Hamas or whatever it is, besides for like having holes in the narratives themselves. Um,
And BB propped him up. I saw that too. Like he kind of propped up Hamas too because he didn't want there to be a chance
yeah,
of
and
it.
like
Yeah,
they just expect them. It doesn't matter. It's all complete deflection. It doesn't matter if Palestinians, every single Palestinian could be a like horrible anti-Semite. It wouldn't matter. They still
yeah.
deserve basic human dignity and human rights, and to not live under a military occupation, to not live under blockade in the largest open air prison in the world.
And more positive experience would kind of decrease that if they weren't getting this horrible treatment all the time. That would kind of decrease the anti-Semitism too, because it's like that their only experience, especially in Gaza, is or even in the West Bank, like you were saying, is are these like either the radical settlers in the West Bank or in Gaza, it's the military. It's like their only experience. So how are they going to have a positive view if that's their only experience and they don't have connection? They haven't had interactions that are positive with like Jews that aren't like that. It's easy to put them. And then it's easy to kind of just have that prejudice if that's your only experience.
Absolutely. Like there's not a single one of us, if we grew up in Gaza, would, be anything other than radical.
Yeah, and that's why it's always like, oh, if they just threw down their arms, there would be peace. But it's like beyond peace, they want equal rights. To me, it's kind of like the equivalent of saying, if the slaves stop revolting, there'd be peace. Well, they're still going to be slaves.
Exactly. 100%.
So as you started doing this activism and being more outspoken about this, did you? What were the reactions from like families and friends? Did they some of them um, say like, "Oh, you were a self-loathing Jew," or did they have like negative reactions?
Yeah, absolutely. I think a lot of time at first there was almost this treatment of like, I think people were like, oh, it's a phase, and kind of like talk to me in this very like nice disagreeing way. And the more and more it became clear that this is, a commitment, that this is like a part of my life. Um, I dealt with a lot more like nastier comments and a lot more, like mostly not in person, mostly over kind of social media or text or whatever. And very quickly kind of like lost friends, but kind of not with a bang so much as with whimper. You know, it wasn't like this big dramatic thing of like you're a self-hating Jew, I can't speak to you ever again. Just kind of alienation, like not being able to look at certain people the same way and not being able to talk to people without this massive elephant in the room. I have had like people who, quite frankly, I never cared about in the first place call me a self-hating Jew, but that's a little different. And very like kind of recently, and this is just like absurd in like the post October 7th reality. I got kicked out of my Brazilian jiu-jitsu gym in Jerusalem. I've been training different martial arts. I wrestled in high school, and I kind of like kept being involved in combat sports, like, you know, for most of my life at this point. And for the past 2-ish years, had this gym in Jerusalem that I was going to really, really consistently, you know, had a relationship with the other guys, like had a good relationship with my coaches. And my social media accounts are all public, and that's by design. And kind of anyone who wanted to know I didn't like talk about my politics in this place really, or about my activism either, but like anyone who wanted to know them could. And people did, like people followed me, people knew. And it was never a problem. And then a week after October 7th, like the coaches pulled me aside after practice, and like long story short, I was kicked out of this gym for my social media post, you know, kind of just like
Oh wow.
condemning the fact that innocent people in Gaza are being killed.
Yeah, and it's like and I'm guessing like you've posted about the hostages too, because like I'm like it's obvious like to me it's like you could think what like the you could be sad for the innocents killed on October 7th and be sympathetic towards the Gazans too. Like I don't know why like these are necessarily in opposition with each other to
Yeah,
like hold these two
exactly.
things
And
at the
like
same
I kind
time.
of really like, you know, felt insane. I was like, did I say something like way more intense than I thought? And like looked back at every single one of my posts. I'm like, wow, these are like so moderate. I stand by every single word of this. Like all, you know, nothing in this could possibly be misconstrued as like, you know, me feeling anything other than remorse about the Israeli civilians that were killed and kidnapped on October 7th, and also just like unequivocal condemnation of the reality that led to October 7th in the first place and the horrific bombardment that has started since then.
And a lot of people aren't really that are saying that like that are condemning people who are denouncing the bombing of Gaza and everything. Like they're not. I don't think a lot of them know that like the families of the hostages, many of them are protesting the bombardment too because they're that's where the hostages are. And recently, the IDF shot and killed 3 hostages, thinking they were Palestinians, even though they held up the surrender flag. And Netanyahu like has been he hasn't been acknowledging the hostages, and there was that one Israeli spy who came here who was like saying that we should have silenced the families of the hostages because we're at
Yeah.
war, we got to do this. So they don't even seem to be caring about their own citizens either.
Yeah, yeah, it's been clear from day one that the government does not care about the hostages. Like you said, that's what, you know, we bomb Gaza, carpet bomb Gaza, the hostages are in Gaza, and our bombs don't know the difference. And, you know, it's really kind of a lot of people in the US on the more kind of like moderate or liberal side, and certainly kind of a lot of American Jewish Zionists think that you can call to bring the hostages home without calling for a ceasefire, and that's an oxymoron. You know,
Yeah,
the fact that that Israeli soldiers killed 3 of the hostages on Friday proves that. The fact that Israeli bombs have killed an undetermined amount of the hostages proves that. And in Israeli society, ironically, kind of everyone knows that, and there are, you know, the people 50 something percent, and like, you know, Israel is unfortunately a deeply militaristic society. The vast majority of Israel is supportive of the IDF and of the war effort in a certain very, very real way. And also, there was a poll that showed that like 54% of Israelis would accept a ceasefire for a hostage exchange. And as you mentioned, the families of the hostages that are really the people kind of leading that struggle. And then on the other, like far extreme on the right, you have, as you mentioned, people like Jonathan Pollard who is saying that we should silence these families because it's like bad PR. And even there are who two families of the hostages. Two of the hostages were from settlements, and their families have been very, very vocal that they don't care. Just like bomb the crap out of Gaza, do what you need to do, and if our sons die, then like they died for the Zionist dream in the state of Israel.
And there's also this kind of double speak from the government. Like they'll say we're trying to not kill Gazans. Oh, there's a difference between the Gazans and Hamas, and then the next sentence, Netanyahu will reference Amalek, which in the Bible they killed every man, woman, and child. And there was that other member of the Israeli government that's like, this is a second Nakba. And the one who said the thing about human animals, like he tried to backtrack after. He's like, no, I mean Hamas. But like when you're saying we're going to cut off the food, water, and electricity, like you're not punishing Hamas in the tunnels. You're punishing the average Gazan and the children too, like all those babies that died because there was no fuel for the incubator and the hospital. And then you combine that with those documents that say that they wanted to transfer them to the Sinai Desert and make them Egypt's problem. It just kind of makes sense. Yeah. Like that's the goal.
Yeah, and you mentioned doublespeak, and like specifically in terms of invoking the Nakba. The Nakba being the like Arabic for catastrophe, and how Palestinians and Palestinian allies refer to the ethnic cleansing that happened in 1948. Israel denies that happened. So, it is this literal bizarre doublespeak of like the Nakba never happened, but we're going to do it again.
Yeah, and I saw where Mehdi Hassan kind of like he really challenged Mark Regev about it, and like he kind of stumbled on his words. He go like the Nakba was good. That's when they lost the war and they realized their government wasn't good, and like
it's insane.
Yeah, and then there's also like that they're telling them to go south, but then they're attacking them from the south too, and like even like Jake Tapper is he wasn't like a harsh critic of Israel before. He was even saying like, well, where are these people supposed to go? Like there's a
yeah.
And do you think what can you say about like how anti-Semitism has been kind of weaponized? Like, because I do think anti-Semitism and like attacks towards Jews should be taken seriously, but like I feel like it's just been thrown with any kind of criticism of Israel, like, and that kind of, in a way, like makes it harder to like call out actual anti-Semitism because it's just in the sea of all this, just like calling things anti-Semitism that really aren't.
Obviously. There have been, more severe incidences that are like very clearly anti-Semitic, particularly in Europe for that matter. And then a lot of it is nothing. It's, leftists and college students criticizing Israel, being anti-Zionist and supporting Palestinian liberation. And that gets deemed anti-Semitic. And it's not this nebulous thing. It's policy, the ADL, the Anti-Defamation League, is wrongly considered the authority on what is and isn't anti-Semitism, and is their official policy that anti-Zionism is de facto automatically anti-Semitism, which means, by their definition, I am an anti-Semite, as are, all of my Jewish comrades in activism, as are the vast majority of Haredi anti-Zionists that are not anti-Zionist for the same reasons I am, but whatever. It's and like you said, it completely delegitimizes actual threats of anti-Semitism and actual anti-Semitic incidences, which are largely propagated by the American evangelical Christian right. And if you're Palestinian and you're told that all of your resistance to your own oppression is anti-Semitism, then are you going to say, oh, well, I don't want to be an anti-Semite, so I'm not going to do that? Or are you just going to stop caring about anti-Semitism?
Yeah, I mean, the later, obviously. So,
like, if Jews were taught that any kind of pushback against real anti-Semitism, it's in Europe in the early 1900s when pogroms were happening, and when you have the Holocaust and everything that happened in the hundreds even before that, for that matter, if we were told, and I guess we probably were told this, that all of our pushback to being annihilated and horrifically oppressed for hundreds of years, if we were told that that's some sort of like anti-white racism, we would just not care.
Yeah, and it's kind of ironic that like evangelical Christians supporting that too, because where do they think Jesus came from? Like he was a Palestinian Jew, so it's like pretty much so.
Yeah, I mean, and I like that, like that obviously gets into like an historical rabbit hole that is like um, beyond the point, but even just like
Yeah,
the evangelical anti-Semitic rabbit like feedback loop of like we love Jews because we want them to move to Israel so that the rapture happens is just bizarre.
yeah, and there's no other because like and there's like nobody would call you like if you said things about the Saudi Arabian government, then nobody would say, "Oh, you're anti-Muslim because you're criticizing Saudi Arabia," or if like you say, "I don't like stuff the British Empire did," "Oh, you hate all English people." Like it's just no other government is like that where you can't criticize them without being called that. So
Yeah, absolutely. And like on a very similar note, kind of with anti-Semitism and terrorism is kind of the other coin of that. Everything is deemed terrorism. If there's violent resistance, and that's more understandably called terrorism. And then if calls for BDS are called terrorism. I remember there was an appeal to the International Criminal Court, and one Israeli member of the Knesset, I don't remember who, called it diplomatic terrorism. This like literal oxymoronic term where it's just like not wanting to be oppressed is terrorism.
yeah, and I know like even when they tried to protest non-violently, I think it was 2018, like they were non-violent protesters were shot too.
Yeah,
Palestinians in
yeah,
Gaza.
yeah. I mean, I've been at like dozens upon dozens, like who knows how many completely nonviolent Palestinian protests, and we like what happens. We get brutalized by the police and army and tear gassed and have stun grenades thrown at us, um, and we get demonized for it.
And you've been taught you wrote a whole article about that, like how like you said the crackdown on civil liberties has been worse even since October 7th, right? So
Yeah, it's been really, really absurd and horrific. Like Palestinians are kind of being arrested left and right for all of just for kind of any sort of local dissent. The most recent absurd case is a Palestinian woman from the West Bank who works in an Israeli hospital was not arrested but detained and interrogated because she blocked colleagues on social media, and then because of that her work permit was revoked, and now she can't work. She lost her livelihood because like she, not even because she posted anything, because she blocked people on social media.
oh wow, yeah. Do you see any hope of there being peace in the future? It seems like because like there has to be like some kind of compromise at some point, but it can't be a compromise like where the Palestinians get the short end of the stick either. So like, do you think there's any chance like there could be like a fair talk of like peace and like also like rights for Palestinians at some point?
Yeah, I mean, like you said, I think there has to be, and kind of if I didn't think there was, then I wouldn't be here. Really, the only thing that keeps me going in my activism, where like I wake up on a daily basis knowing that like I might get attacked, I might get arrested, I might get whatever, um, is that hope that there will be justice here, and that like I should have the tremendous privilege of being alive to see it. And like for me, like my vision of that is one equal state where everybody has equal rights, and we live in a mixed society where my Palestinian friends of the West Bank can just drive and visit me in Jerusalem the same way that I drive down to visit them all the time without any barriers or checkpoints or permits. And obviously, I know how far off that is, and I know how crazy that even sounds to some people, but it's just kind of what keeps me going is believing in that reality and wanting to see it.
Yeah, and even when we get to that place, there's going to be still like tensions because of all the history. So, and that'll probably take a couple of generations to get over too. So, but
Yeah, absolutely. And like to me, like that kind of starts now. Like beyond doing important. We need intermingling. Israel is a segregated society, even within Israel itself, within Israel's recognized borders. Palestinians and Israelis go to different schools, mostly live in different cities, and even in the cities that they call mixed, which like in anywhere else it's just called a city, they live in different neighborhoods and like don't really interact with each other. You like have you'll like see that your pharmacist is a Palestinian. Obviously, if you're Palestinian, you would interact with Israelis more if you live in Israel. That is because you're the minority, but it's completely not reciprocal, and that basically it needs both. As far as like any Jewish or Israeli ally in this struggle, like we need to be putting our bodies on the line and doing everything we can to bring about like kind of political justice and a just future. And we also need to be breaking down the social walls that don't want us to care about each other, don't want us to have meaningful relationships with each other. And that kind of breaks down any, it stops working at a certain point. Like any sort like systems of segregation, if like too many people are actually intermingling, collapse.
yeah, because it's hard to think like, oh, flatten Gaza, get rid of them all. If you like, someone in Gaza, like a name in the face, or someone who's even just know someone who's Palestinian, not necessarily in Gaza, they have family in Gaza. It's hard to think like, wait, there's no us and them. That's us too. So,
Yeah, absolutely. I have so many kind of like um, Israeli or Jewish friends that since this have all started have asked me if I have any friends in Gaza, and I don't. In a lot of ways, that's so much easier for me. I don't have people that I'm like worried for on that level, um, and it's kind of a massive privilege to not need to deal with that. And also, I like there's a reason I don't have friends from Gaza. There's a massive wall. It's almost impossible to. I have friends that have had there was this man named Khalil who lived in Gaza, who like a lot of my friends kind of had like a really meaningful friendship and relationship with him through different work that he did together over Zoom or over the phone, over years and years. And he was killed
wow.
in one of him and his entire family in
Wow.
one of the Israeli bombardments. And it really just like it was so horrible to see all my friends go through that, and it just made it so obvious to me that like 99% of like normal functioning human beings, if you knew even one person in Gaza, if you knew a single person, that was like you don't even need to like them. If you just like had like, oh, I know this dude Khalil, he's a real fucking person, no one would support this.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess. Well, I guess they can meet because like there's a small percentage. It's like most of them are stuck there, but like I think there's like a small percentage that actually get to leave with work visas. So like if someone has the luck of meeting one of those people,
Yeah,
that'd be good. But even that
yeah,
can be rare too.
absolutely.
And all the talk like how because like I see a lot of people denying that there's racism there and like saying like, oh, it's multicultural, it's all this like that. To me, it kind of reminds me of like how people like it said in the segregated South, like, oh, people that happy with how things are with the segregation, or even during slavery, they say, well, our slaves are happy. Like it's the same thing if you go back in history. So
Absolutely. And the second you take a deeper look, it's just impossible to not see how nonsensical it is. Like I have Israeli and Jewish friends coming at to me all the time as if I'm like the authority on Palestinian identity and the Palestinian reality. I'm just like, I just like have friends that are Palestinian. I'm just living like what I think is like, I think it's like a normal thing that a lot of my friends are Palestinian. That should be normal. And basically my other activist friends have the same thing, and none of my other Israeli friends or Jewish friends have that. And it just kind of like the fact that you need to come to me to ask what Palestinians may or may not think shows how completely segregated this country is. And that's only within Israel itself, and ignoring the like occupation of the West Bank and of Gaza, where it's just like on a different stratosphere of oppression.
Yeah. Do you think we'll see like a Nelson Mandela kind of figure come forward, or does that seem?
Um, I hope so. I think so. I definitely think that kind of like it's a movement, and movements need leaders, and that's why you have people like Nelson Mandela. But it's going to be all of us. There's somebody who's going to get their name in the textbooks, but
Yeah.
it's the other thousands and thousands and thousands of people.
Yeah, there's
doing
always a
it
collective effort. Like even with
make the
Rosa
difference.
Parks, there were many that refused to sit on the bus. She was just the one that was remembered.
Yeah,
Refused to stand or whatever it was. Yeah.
exactly.
So, any final thoughts or things you'd like to say before we wrap up?
I would just thank you everyone for taking the time to listen and keep fighting. If you're in the U.S., like keep joining protests, keep being in the streets, and keep following Palestinians on social media. Especially reporters in Gaza that are like making it possible to actually see the horrible atrocities that are going on, and don't let it become kind of just part of the news cycle. As long as this is going on, make as much noise as possible.
All right. Well, yeah, thank you for coming on. And those of you who want to keep updated with future episodes of Let's Talk About the Deep Stuff on Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts, or just follow me on social media. Let's Talk About the Deep Stuff. And that's about it for this episode. We'll catch you on the next one.